Good Friday afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Blue Water Climate Control Volquest.com podcast with Jesse Simonton and Austin Price. Brent Hubbs, glad to have you along with us. Rob, obviously been dealing with things in Nashville for what we thought was going to be the SEC tournament, which, as we know, is canceled. And guys, this is just strange. I mean, and look, it's the right thing. I'm not saying that, but it's odd to see the sports world at a halt. And that's where we're at. Sports, with the exception of, golf playing a tournament without spectators. I guess NASCAR is going to race, but with the exception of that, basically the life of sport, which is such a getaway for everybody, is at a halt.
Yeah, NASCAR's going to race, and then golf's going to play without fans. Those are no-contact sports versus anything with contact. Has kind of been canceled. It is weird. I mean, you and I discussed it on Thursday when it all went down, and we were trying to see if they're going to allow us to come to practice or not. So we kind of went to lunch, and we're sitting there watching, all these things on TV, and Jesse, I mean, it felt almost like 9/11 was just kind of how, like, you're just seeing these empty arenas with people just kind of talking about, where do we go from here? I mean, it was an eerie feeling.
Well, each hour it seems like, another domino is going to fall or another shoe is going to drop. We said it on our video. I do think that for a large swath of this country, and it clearly took too long with the way this thing has unfolded, but it became a true reality, the seriousness of the situation, at some point Wednesday. For some, maybe it was when there was some of the Congress testimony. For others, it was, what happened with the Utah Jazz. For others, it was the presidential address, or maybe it was Tom Hanks. Whatever it was, it seemed like the light started flashing big time at some point on Wednesday, which then actually made it everything that happened Thursday curious, because it was like, well, why didn't the SEC and all these other conferences just wake up at 9 a.m. and say, we're done? Which is what I think some coaches, including Rick Barnes and some others, were kind of wondering into the evening of Wednesday night and otherwise, like, what are we waiting on here?
Don't you think, had the situation at the Big Ten tournament unfolded differently, and thankfully it did not, but had there been a situation where the Nebraska coach, the diagnosis was different, he had been around his team in a locker room and that kind of setting, don't you think that would, if there would, coaches have talked about this, even Rick Barnes mentioned this, you're waiting until somebody is diagnosed with it before you make a move, before you make a decision. Had the diagnosis on Wednesday night not been an immediate test result of the common flu, I think you would have seen movement on Wednesday night.
Perhaps, but I think part of the reason why the NBA and some others have even kind of acknowledged in the aftermath that perhaps they waited too late is there is, and we'll shift it towards this and here in Tennessee and the kind of the college scope. There is a disconnect when schools across the country are saying, hey, we're going to go to online classes for campus safety. We think there should be minimal human interaction, whatever. But at the same time, we think your boys should still be, hooping it up together or sweating it out together on the football field. That's where I think the disconnect is, and why there's even some people, including, even some coaches, that are like, kind of, what are we doing?
Yeah, I think, Austin, in the minds of a lot of people, sports is the untouchable. You know what I mean?
What's the escape?
It's the escape. It's the untouchable. When you think about it, and this is totally, there's no comparison to the two. I'm not doing that. But what was the first thing that got this country back to normal after 9/11?
It was football in the World Series.
Baseball, right? I mean, the president comes out, throws out the first pitch. Hey, sports is back. We're going to be all right. So the cancellation of sports, Jesse, you were talking about the light bulb or what connected with people, and brought some seriousness. I think for a large majority of people, it was the sports front. Wait a minute, if we're canceling sports in this country, this is a serious deal. This is a serious thing. And so I think that there's kind of a feeling among some, and some people in power, that sports is a little bit untouchable. And that's why you saw, okay, well, you got the academic people, they're just being really cautious, but sports is sports. Sports has got it under control. Everybody needs sports. Then when it got real on Wednesday night with the Utah Jazz and with the situation in Nebraska, followed up by the second, Utah Jazz player diagnosed with it on Thursday morning. Then it became, I think, inevitable for the NCAA to say, and conferences to step in and say, hey, we don't need to be participating in anything.
Right. And again, there's I think there's been a tacit acknowledgement from whether it's NCAA, MLB, NHL, all these leagues, MLS, all these folks that have canceled, all the way down just to the government, is that we don't know what we don't know. And that's kind of where we're at right now. Now, maybe that changes in 24 hours and 48 hours. Yeah, and maybe that changes in 24 to 48 hours, but that's where the situation seems to lie right now.
Which is why I said the best course of action was not to cancel. It was to do what some of these sports have done, which is just suspend. I mean, canceling the SEC tournament's one thing, but at the end of the day, all kids want to play for the national title in the NCAA tournament. All pros want to play for the NBA title. Suspend, postpone, and see what happens. I mean, 2 weeks from now, it may be way worse, but 2 weeks from now, it may be, on the cusp of everything, getting back to normal. You just don't know. I mean, no one knows, and how this next month will play out.
Well, absolutely, and that's what you guys were saying. I mean, the unknown is the unknown, and sometimes you go on about your business because you don't want to think about the unknown, but then there are other times where the unknown becomes something you have to deal with, and that was simply the case here. So the commissioner visits with the media on Thursday, says the hope is to resume, March 30th, but made it clear that that's not a given, that it's definitely going to happen. I think it's going to be really intriguing to see what they do. You mentioned, you didn't cancel. Could you realistically take a couple, 3 weeks off from basketball and say, okay, now we're going to go play the national tournament? When nobody's played in 3 weeks.
You would probably have a week or two of practice, or at least a week of practice to kind of get back. It's kind of like when you come out when there's a lightning delay. They don't just come out and just go right back to play. They have to stretch and all that. Same thing here.
But and look, that's all hypothetical. I get all that, but I mean, what are you going to do in terms of your bids and all these other things? Or is it just going to be we're just not playing it this year? And I think that. Is where
there's
going to
be a lot. There's going to be a lot of hard questions, and decisions made. I think between now, as we sit here in the middle of March, and I would say between the next 30 days till the middle of April.
In my opinion, I think they should go ahead and seed it out. Have the committee go ahead and seed it out, and then. That way, that's not going to be what's going to change between now and then. Everything, whatever it is now, is kind of how it's going to be, because nobody's going to play another game between now and Sunday. So I would go ahead and seed it out, and go ahead. I wouldn't release it, but if I was the committee, I would go ahead and seed it out and go ahead and get it all done. And then that way, if 3 weeks from now it looks like you could still have it, then boom. It's easier to fall into motion instead of having to then all of a sudden you got to reconvene and go through all the.
Yeah, but there's a lot of elements to that. I mean, can you get the facilities to use? I mean, what do you do with ticket? I mean, there's so much involved, and even the thought of putting it back on, bumping it back 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, and still playing the tournament. There's the whole.
Think about how quickly
so much stuff that has
Think
to
about
be
how
there.
quickly it manifested itself on Wednesday alone, where in the morning the NCAA released a pretty brief statement. Then by lunchtime, Emmert had come out and said, all right, we're going to, the tournament sites, no fans, players and parents only.
They were looking at taking it from the Superdome.
Looking for the Final Four that was going to be in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium to maybe playing it where the Hawks play, or even smaller where Georgia Tech plays. By the nighttime, things were getting canceled. By the next day, almost every conference tournament had been, canceled, and now we're looking at a, time where Duke and other schools are saying we're not going to participate.
Yeah, well, and I think that the commissioner of the SEC said it best when he was, the answer I don't know is a viable answer right now, because as he said in his press conference, nobody was ever prepared. I mean, you didn't, when you were being groomed by somebody, this was not a part of your study. This is not something you studied in class. It's not something that anybody ever even thought about. in terms of, hey, you're going to be the next commissioner. We're grooming you to be the commissioner. Now, what's your policy for, a virus outbreak that may, suspend much of the activity in the world? How are you going to handle that stuff? So there's so much unknown with that down the road. I think the other question on the shorter end of it right now, we have seen the ACC, and the ACC has suspended all activity, including practice. Is everybody around the country going to follow suit with spring practice on that, or is this going to be conference by conference?
I think so, because at the end of the day, I think you're going to, it's like a staring contest, see who blinks first. Same thing like if you're leaving it up to each individual school, well, LSU and Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee and Auburn and Florida and all the big wigs of this league, they're going to sit there and nobody's going to want to have somebody have a competitive advantage. But at the same time, they don't want to look tone deaf either. So I think now that the ACC was the first one to kind of blink as far as saying, okay, we're not going to do spring practice right now.
We're going to suspend it, until the end of the month.
Again, because as we talked about on the video Thursday, it's spaced out so much that if you did take the next few weeks off, you could just do 15 practices in 2.5 weeks and be done.
Right.
It's also like the Allen. It's practice, not a game. I'm not talking about canceling games right now for college football. I'm talking about suspending spring practice. It just seems prudent across the board. If all these leagues are shutting down, these boys probably shouldn't be out there knocking heads, especially when you got teams coming back from spring break and wherever they've been and where the kids are going.
Now, the NBA says they're going to allow teams to practice.
They say that, but you have several teams right now also saying, as we record this, that they're giving their guys off, 4 or 5 days, and then they'll reconvene. So even that, who knows how much can change in 4 or 5 days. So I think it makes the most sense right now. If you're suspending, activities until March 30th, to do it till then, to make a decision after that date or use that date as kind of an early timeline deal, and then reassess. That would be kind of my suggestion.
And of course, Tennessee practiced yesterday, and now they're through their 2 days of t-shirts and shorts. Won't have to do that when they come back from spring break if they elect to continue to practice. They may not, but it gives them some time now that you've gotten through those first 2 initial practices. Plus, Tennessee did have a couple of recruits on campus yesterday. As Greg Sankey announced, he was going to be suspending on and off-campus recruiting, but they were, if you're already on campus, you got to finish your visit. So, like Caden Salter was in here from Texas, Hudson Wolf was in here from West Tennessee. I thought those were 2 big visits. Salter's a guy that has risen the board for Tennessee on the quarterback front, and then Hudson Wolf had been several different places, Alabama, Ole Miss, you name them, he's kind of been to them, and he hadn't been to Tennessee in a while, and to come up here with his family and see it kind of one-on-one for about 5 or 6 hours, I think was a big deal for Tennessee to kind of maybe get a little bit more momentum there, because they didn't have a whole lot, because I'm not sure that how they were kind of with the change of the tight end coaches. I felt like there might have been something lost in the shuffle there a little bit.
Yeah, because we saw him work out for Niedermeyer, and now this past summer or last summer, and now you got a new tight ends coach, Acevet. Where's that relationship?
So he got to come watch him practice yesterday. I think that one is knowing he can't take a visit for a few weeks, I think it'll be interesting to see if the momentum they can carry out of this visit stays with him, because it's not like he's going to go, to Alabama this weekend, or Ole Miss, or Clemson, or Georgia, or some other school that could potentially swing back some momentum, because he's not going to see anybody else for a while. So the last thing he's seen is Tennessee. Does that pay dividends in the recruitment of Hudson Wolf or Caden Salter?
Yeah, I mean, and who knows with that. I think the other thing, Jesse, you pointed this out on Thursday when we were talking in the video deal. What do they do with, if this is a 3 or 4 week or whatever delay or suspension of recruiting activities, how do they adjust the calendar? Do they take the dead period off the books in July, and open that back up, or do they say, you know what, this is just a shortened year? Okay, we're just not going to worry about those 3 weeks. We're going to put the calendar right back in place. How big of a deal is it if you miss 3 weeks of recruiting, of potentially having unofficial visitors and official visitors. Let's put it that way too.
Well,
You can have
I mean, I do
official
think it's noteworthy and potentially significant, especially when you're talking about how many kids now, 70+% sign early. And so if you're eliminating some of this part of the calendar where kids are allowed to go on these visits, both officially and unofficially, I think the impact could be fairly significant. I mean, we haven't talked about Zach Evans in a few weeks, but this this is, the saga continues there, and this has nothing to do with his own, kind of wild recruitment. I mean, he was supposed to visit Florida next weekend. That now cannot happen. So what happens there? I mean, it's just kind of a wild deal.
Yeah, because
who knows? Because he may decide,
I'm done.
I don't want to take that visit anymore.
I'm tired of all this.
I don't want to take that visit. I mean, you never know how kids view things. I mean,
Yeah, well, but at the same time, Tennessee was hoping to get him on campus sometime unofficially last weekend or this week.
Right.
And that's not happening.
Yeah. So who knows how that happens? And again, I think the question is, how long does this suspension? And again, we're putting this in the context of sports. It's much greater than sports, but that's what we talk about, here on the site. And that's what we do is we do sports. How long does this recruiting lull last? How much does that cost you momentum with somebody? That somebody was planning on coming in. This is the time of year when a kid's on a spring break. He might see 7 schools in 5 days. And might make that caravan type trip that they've been planning for a while, and it doesn't get to happen now. So, does the NCAA step in and adjust the calendar, or do they not mess with that and just let it go? I think it's something that you don't have to make that decision now, but on down the road is going to be something to talk about and some kind of decision that's got to be made there. Among a bunch of other decisions, what do you do with your scheduling for your spring sports if you start them back up? How do you handle that? Austin, you mentioned the practice time. If you're going to suspend and you're not going to have spring practices on your campus for football, you're also not going to have baseball practice, you're not going to have softball practice. None of those practices, golf, track and field, are going to happen. So are you going to do a 2-week, kind of practice period to get back going before you start playing again? Are you going to jump right into conference play with everybody? Lots and lots of decisions.
Eligibility,
Yeah, again, Greg Sankey was asked, for seniors, would they get the opportunity to have another year? And, he said, obviously at that point in time, it's not something that they've even really dove into or talked about. But
what seemed kind of like an odd answer. I know things are moving fast, but that seemed kind of like an odd answer when a day earlier the Ivy League had canceled everything and their commissioner had come out and said, we're going to issue a blanket, you get an extra year.
One thing that makes that...
Now, I know they don't have scholarships,
right,
so it's a little bit weird.
It's a little bit of a different deal there because it's not financially the same responsibility for an Ivy League school as it would be for a Power 5 school or an SEC school in terms of funding, numbers that you deal with. I mean, obviously they're dealing with a total different set of how many people can get grant and aid and your numbers that you're dealing with there. So that's a little bit easier for them. But to your point, I think it's a fair point. That question probably shouldn't have caught you off guard because that had already been discussed and had already been talked about to some degree. Hey, let me tell you a little bit about Blue Water Climate Control. Then we're going to talk about the football team and what we saw on the practice field on Tuesday for this football team and kind of revisit some of that stuff a little bit. But allergy season is almost here. Allergy sufferers will be looking for some safe airspace. Do you know that pollutants in your home are 2 to 10 times worse than outdoors? Blue Water Climate Control offers solutions that protect your airspace by controlling the dirt and dust that accumulates inside your system that can reduce efficiency by 30 to 50%, controlling allergens that cause allergic reaction and asthma attacks, all of these other things, controlling the toxins and odors by pets and people and all these things that you need to know during this difficult allergy season that is upon us. So you can call and schedule a free consultation today with Blue Water Climate Control at 865-299-2290, and don't forget to mention Volquest. That's 865-299-2290. 888-888-2290. You can follow them on Twitter at blueh2o_climate or check them out online at bluewaterclimatecontrol.com. All right, let's talk about this football team. We got the eye test for one day. Some had Harrison Bailey winning the Heisman Trophy or the starting job, which happens. Look, that's a normal reaction. Now that we didn't get to see him the second day, but you had a chance to kind of relax and think about it a little bit. Is there anything circling back around that maybe jumped out or you thought more about that maybe wasn't in your initial reaction in the 2-minute drill or in the practice observations after Tuesday's workout? Anything jump out?
No, because you're only out there for such a short amount of time. And of course I'm bouncing around getting all the video and stuff, and you're bouncing around getting pictures. So it's kind of hard when you're looking through just the viewfinder or whatever. It's hard to kind of get a gauge on unless it happens on camera for you. Jesse's probably a way better person to talk about specifics because I only get to see again. You're talking about a handful of minutes out there.
I tell you what, one thing that jumped out to me, and I think this is Jesse, was because he's a more veteran coach, and this is not a knock on Brian Niedermeyer or Sheldon Felton, but I thought it was pretty clear to see Jimmy Brumball's personality and Jimmy Brumball's kind of
he was confident.
Practice demeanor. You know what I'm saying? I mean, he looked like a veteran guy. That all he did was he changed logos. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
He was. There was not a. And I'm not saying Shelton Felton was kind of feeling his way, but that was a new deal with him. He had been an Akron the year before. Brian Niedermeyer's never coached linebackers specifically by himself. I thought that was the one thing to me that jumped out defensively. A little bit of swagger and confidence from Jimmy Brumball, which you would expect from a veteran coach.
And honestly, I didn't think he carried himself a lot like Tracy Rocker in terms of being very, focused on kind of fundamentals. Very, he was kind of a demonstrative teacher, and clearly, like Rocker, had command of his guys. Those guys were, in tune with what he wanted. I thought, I put this in the notes, maybe not like an individual, but I thought it makes sense too. Will Friend, almost all these guys are back. They were playing with some pace. The drills at the offensive line had some real intensity to them, and that's good because they need to kind of hit the ground running because a lot of folks are excited about that side of the ball, or specifically that position group. And if Tennessee's going to take a leap, they need that group to also kind of ascend. So
yeah, and you would expect that the expectations for that group from the coaches are certainly higher. But you think back to a year ago with the offensive line, and so much of that was play lower, just simply be more physical. You got to be more physical. Jeremy Pruitt talked about this when he talked about his defensive line a year ago. When he talked about, we're trying to get them to middle school, or I don't remember the exact quote, we're trying to get them to the high school. Right now they're middle school or elementary school.
Yeah, right.
Felt like a year ago that's where the offensive line was, that they were in elementary school trying to learn the expectations from Jim Chaney. They're clearly not there now and going faster. I thought Trey, clearly the offseason's been good to him, and the fact that he's had an offseason has been really good to him. And it looked like to me Cade Mays was leaner.
Yeah, I agree.
And in a good way. I mean, not that he was like, oh, geez, you got Jameer Johnson. Maybe it's because he's standing at times next to Jameer Johnson, who might not weigh 260 pounds right now. It doesn't look like. But Cade looked a little trimmer and looked a little leaner, I guess is a better way to say it.
Yeah, I think so. And I've kind of started to notice that when he would post pictures from like the NCAA weekend or whatever. He looked like he was, in pretty good shape.
Maybe it was the light-colored uniform.
I had heard he had a little bit of a back issue, but I don't think that's as big a deal as a few people have let on. So yeah, a lot of with him is just he probably understands the terminology as good as anybody or the concepts because it's similar to what Jim ran at Georgia, and so
yeah, he should have gone fast. He should have been able to go fast.
Yeah, it's not a matter of that. For him, I think it's just understand whether you're going to be eligible in the fall or not. So he's going to approach each day thinking he is until he's told he's not. So Jesse talked about Jerome Carvin. He's one guy that I did think he looked like he's in the best shape that I've seen him since he's been here. you know, interested to see like Darnell's ankle is still taped up. I mean, that should be better by now. I don't know. That's kind of a little bit befuddling to me.
He also looked. I said this on one of the. I mean, I thought he looked a little heavy.
I did too.
I like, you know, for as much positive pub as I think for a lot of guys out there. I thought Kayvon Bennett continues to look good. You know, there's some Roman Harrison physically. He got the, you know, what for from Shelton Felton when we were out there briefly for not attacking the drill he wanted, but physically I thought, you know, he looked a little thicker. But I did not think that Darnell had maybe shed some of the bad weight that he had a year ago. Which maybe that coincides with whatever's going on with his ankle. I don't know, but it was noticeable.
Yeah, it certainly was. And I'm sitting here just looking at Twitter. We'll get to that. The NCAA has canceled the remaining winter and spring championships in all sports, according to this. The tweet or the messages, Mark Emmert and the Board of Governors canceled Division I men's and women's 2020 basketball tournaments as well as all remaining winter and spring NCAA championships. This decision is based on the current public health threat and the ability to ensure events do not contribute to spread and the impact of hosting such events at any time during this academic year, given ongoing decisions by other entities. So that's pretty significant there. The economic impact of that long term for some places are going to be there. We'll talk about that in the coming days as well. But that just being handed down or issued out as we record this. So the NCAA basketball tournament is over. But let's go back to football as we wrap things up here a little bit. Surprised Cade, and it's only individual periods, so who knows what happens afterward. Were you surprised he was getting as much left tackle work it looked like while we were out there?
No, especially with Wanye out this spring. You know, I think they're just trying to figure out combinations and, you know.
Not that he's going to play there, but maybe be the backup there. Obviously, guard. He's played a ton of guard. It's not like he needs a ton of reps at guard, right?
Correct. I think he's,
okay.
You know, he played very little left tackle at Georgia, played a little bit of right tackle. He played left tackle there at the end of last year when they were, you know, without those guys in the bowl game and stuff. You know, he kind of played everywhere. Hell, he was snapping the ball.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he
we did.
You know, yesterday. So, I mean, he played some center down at Georgia. Hey, that's the best thing going for him is the fact he's been so versatile in his time, both in Athens and then potentially here.
Yeah, he played all over the place.
Play all over the place.
Yeah, he certainly can.
And he's big and he's physical and he still moves pretty good for a kid his size.
Yeah, it certainly does. All right, last thing, and we'll wrap it up. And that's go ahead.
I was just going to say as an adjacent to that, with Cade working at left tackle, I do think that also speaks to. Yeah, we said, you know, Darnell's a little bit heavy. The continued kind of belief that Calvert could be the guy at right tackle. Now he's gonna have to beat out Darnell, but that they believe that it's those. You know, if you felt like you were unsure about that, I think Cade would even admit if he was sitting here, he's probably more comfortable at right tackle versus playing left tackle. Cade would probably be getting a real look at right tackle. So I think that, you know, some early confidence maybe coming off of what he did at the end of last season and this offseason for a guy like Kayron Calvert.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting whenever spring practice resumes if they work a Calvert at left tackle just to see, or does that mess with him? You know what I'm saying? Because it's been get him to this point. Do you want to take and mess with that? You know, with Darnell where he's at, does he even get a look at left tackle at some point in time? Because we know they like to cross-train. I think that's going to be a storyline worth keeping an eye on as we progress through spring practice when it resumes. Lastly, on the quarterbacks, Jeremy Pruitt said all the right things on Tuesday. Jerry Garantano would not declare him the guy. Says he's going to rep all 6 quarterbacks until somebody says, you know, or eliminates themselves. How quickly do we think this thing eliminates itself and pairs down? Wherever they go. I mean, is this a second week of spring practice? Is this 5 practices in? There's no way it's going to be 6 all the way through spring ball.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think it'll be 6 all the way through spring ball, but I think it's probably 4 or 5. I don't know how it's going to pare down by a bunch. I mean, like, unless you're just going to go ahead and say, okay, Jared's the guy. Because, I mean, I don't, you know, I said it on Tuesday. I'll say it again. He was more complimentary of J.T. Shroud than he was Brian Maurer in that when he was talking about quarterbacks the other day. And kind of talking about Maurer, he was just kind of a drive-by comment. I thought that was telling. and then, obviously Harrison and Jimmy are freshmen. So, I mean, like, unless you're going to just say Jarrett's our guy, which I don't think he's going to do, because I don't think he wants to go down that path of anointing someone. I think he'll just keep it broad. You may see a couple of guys, take a step back at some point in the spring, but who knows how this is going to play out for us when we even get to watch spring.
I mean, I think I continue to maintain that Jarrett's going to have to lose this job, and he could.
Somebody's about to take it from him or whatever.
And he could. No, I think Jarrett's going to have to lose. Like he's going to have it. He's going to get the chance going out there week 1 and then week 2 against Oklahoma, and if he, proverbially, craps the bed, then that's how the door opens for quarterback X, whether it's Harrison, whether it's Shrout, whether it's Mount, whoever happens to still be in that room there. And that, I think, is what is going to be most interesting to me whenever this is, in this weird kind of nebulous that we're in right now. Whenever spring practice does resume and this competition takes place, I'm much less interested in is someone almost nipping at the heels of Jarrett Garantano, but what is the pecking order behind him? And that, if we do get a spring game, that could be telling.
Does the fact that if you're going to keep it open all spring long and you come out of spring with it open and everybody gets, a guy feels like he's gotten he didn't get whittled out or kicked off the island or whatever, reality series, does that open the door possibly for the room to stay packed and not something? Because, I think we've all believed, hey, that room's going to empty out a little bit post-spring practice. And I think part of the reason I felt that way was because the guy's going to feel like, hey, I don't have a chance to win the job here. I didn't get the reps. I didn't get this, that, and the other. Can you keep it even enough to where it causes a guy to say, you know what, I got a real chance to win this job here, and more people stay?
I'm going to say no, because I think that they've especially for a guy like JT Sprout, he's seen firsthand last year, even when he played decent, and coming in for Jarrett when he got knocked out from South Carolina and stuff, you get to the next game and he was a non-factor. So, in my mind, I think he's going to be, he's one that's a domino. I think Matt Orr, again, I go back to those two are the most likely. Jimmy and Harrison are going nowhere. And I don't think Jarrett's going anywhere, because I think it'll be, it's going to be set up for unless he just, as Jesse says, craps the bed. He's going to be, the presumed guy exiting spring. So, no, I think that this very much sets up for one of those two to potentially leave after spring.
I would agree with that.
If not both.
All right, we'll see what happens with that whenever spring practice resumes. We will get football again. We will get college baseball again. We will get professional sports again. When? We don't know. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to talk about recruiting. We'll continue to talk about this team. We'll continue to talk about sports because, quite frankly, with everything going on right now, sports are fun to talk about. So that's what we're going to do, and we'll continue to do here on the Blue Water Climate Control Podcast, as well as on the message board and other outlets as well. That's going to do it for this edition of the podcast. For Jesse Simonton and Austin Price, I'm Brent Hubbs. Thanks for joining us, everybody.